If you're like most people, you genuinely want to be a good person. Even though you put your self-interests above others, make the occasional hurtful comment or tell a self-serving lie, you realize that you're not your best self in these moments, and that the world really would be made better if you and everyone else could live up to their moral ideals. This is hardly a controversial point. Where opinions start to diverge, however, is on the question where this notion of right and wrong comes from, what the basis for morality really is. We agree that lying is bad, but what makes it so? Is it bad because it's in violation of the 9th commandment? Most believers will argue that without God there is no way to discern good from evil, that from an atheistic perspective, life on earth is simply about the survival of the fittest and holds no special significance.
If you don't believe in God, then where's your moral barometer? That's just me talking. You can believe what you want to believe, but if you're an atheist, you're basing your goodness and morality on what?
Non-believers, on the other hand, will argue emphatically that they do have this ability to discern what's right, and may even launch the accusation that it's the religious who would apparently rape and murder, but for the fact that God tells them not to. Whether your morality is informed by a belief in God or not, it's quite clear that morality is in principle about maximizing the well-being of living beings. Maybe you decide to stay in a toxic relationship that is diminishing your well-being, for no reason other than it being your religious duty to honor the sanctity of marriage. After all, what are a few unhappy decades with the old ball and chain compared to a literal eternity in heaven? Whether you acknowledge it or not, you're still acting out of a concern for your ultimate well-being. If you teach your children to never tell a lie because it's God's will and to secure them a place in heaven, you're still worried about their well-being, if not in this life, in the hereafter. Lying is bad because it diminishes the well-being of the person being lied to, at the latest when the truth eventually surfaces. Even if the deceived person remains in blissful ignorance forever, lying demonstrates a blatant disregard for the basic desire of the deceived person to have an accurate picture of reality. It may confer a momentary benefit to the liar, but even he must realize he wouldn't want to be in the other person's shoes and could therefore not want this to be generally acceptable behavior. Maybe you've come across one of the following philosophical arguments that attempt to show that morality can't merely be about well-being. After all, there may be situations in which well-being is trumped by other, more important concerns like justice and truth. Consider, for instance, Robert Nozick's experience machine, a device that allows the user to live in a simulated world that is indistinguishable from reality, with the only difference that once you're plugged in, you never have to endure pain, disappointments, or dissatisfaction, but instead enjoy a continuous stream of pleasurable experiences. Put like this, many people would prefer to live in the real world, even if it means having to deal with all the difficulties life throws at us. Many identify with the protagonist from The Matrix, who prefers to see the truth, ugly as it may be, rather than continuing his ordinary life in relative ease. Or consider the following scenario. Betsy and Xander are in a loving relationship. Betsy is heads over heels in love with Xander and couldn't be happier. Unbeknownst to Betsy, Xander is cheating on her since the beginning of the relationship. If she found out, she would be inconsolable and unable to find love ever again. However, if she remained ignorant of Xander's infidelity, she would stay happy. Many feel that there is value to telling Betsy the truth, even if it means considerable diminishment of her well-being. This seems to show that our notion of right and wrong can't simply be informed by what best improves well-being. What all these arguments fail to consider, however, is that being in contact with reality and truth can only matter insofar it can be experienced by someone. If you're living the perfect life, but can't be 100% sure that your experiences are real, or that your spouse is really faithful, it's not the perfect life. Even if you don't harbor the slightest doubts and are in complete ignorance, like Betsy in her relationship with Xander, the actual circumstances can only matter if they matter to someone. That is, if it in some way enters a conscious mind where it potentially impacts well-being. Information that never enters any conscious mind can't be of any moral concern or any value. In the case of Betsy and Xander, it matters to the third-person observer, the one that ponders the thought experiment, who deems this deception to be disturbingly heartless. Deception of this kind is wrong because a world in which this were okay, as long as the deceived never found out, would be a world that diminishes well-being overall. If this deception were considered moral, stable and happy relationships would be very rare indeed. In the case of the experience machine, we deem it wrong not for reasons that stand outside the scope of well-being. A concern for well-being is smuggled in the form of a concern for what consequences this would have on the people in our lives if we just vanished into a simulation and dropped all responsibilities to our family and friends, whose well-being is also affected by this decision. Morality is not about the well-being of one person, it's about the collective well-being of every conscious being, and discovering rules that correctly judge the trade-offs between the well-being of one person versus another or many others can be very difficult or seemingly impossible. Needless to say, there is still a lot of moral philosophy to be done.